Greetings. My name is Erika Murcia. I am the author of TEJIENDO, our poetic rematriation with Mother Earth, published by Samsara Editorial in Mexico in November 2024. And on this new moon in Gemini, I am accompanied by Priya. And Priya supported me with proofreading TEJIENDO. And it's really exciting to me to actually be meeting on this day, specifically because Priya, you were the first person that, I encountered in my crossroad as I have been writing a lot already and was the project was emerging, right? The potential, the possibility of a book. And so before we get into that conversation about what emerged for you, I wanted to ask you, welcome, and how are you doing today?
Thank you. Yeah, it's so lovely that we get to talk about your book in a more public forum. I'm doing well, trying to ease into Gemini season in the ways that I can. Feeling a lot of my 12th house placements very activated, but also feeling just sort of the shedding of skin that happens in the spring and moving through sort of the stagnant feelings of the winter and listening to the birds outside a lot. So that's been helping me feel a lot more settled in this seasonal transition for sure.
That's so beautiful. So I can't believe that we met in 2018, and we both were students in different schools, in different uh, departments at the University of Michigan, and that's like for me it's like a miracle, right? When you encounter people in this way that you came to my school for a conference and you were one of the organizers, and I had already graduated, but I was doing I was working, and I loved engaging in these type of spaces, and I came to this um, conference, and then you and I ended being in the small committee that was people who identified with our indigenous roots, right? And then I really appreciated it because I had a complex feeling with just being identified as a Latina or as a Latino person. And then you're there, and we had, I think, another one person, like, another person. And then after I went back home, I remember writing on my to-do list, Priya is going to be my proofreader. And so weird for me is weird in the sense that I like the weirdness of how it came. And then I just let it go, and I think 2018 to 2023, I reached out and I said, hey, Priya, I think I have a manuscript, like, more or less done. I would love you to be my proofreader. And you say yes. And I mean, of course, we had been cultivating um, a relationship, right? A professional relationship, a friendship throughout the years. So, what did it emerge for you when I asked you this question and this invitation, when I invited you to be with me?
Mhm. Yeah, like you said, it felt very serendipitous that we met in that particular setting. Also strange. It's a very strange place and context in which to build relationships. Um, the university, I mean, and that particular conference where we met also had a sort of tradition of meeting outside of its regular programming in caucus groups, right? And I was part of the organizing team for this conference, and they had the sort of typical identity-based racial caucus groups for you know, Black folks and Asian and Pacific Islander folks and like Latine folks and, you know, Swana or MENA or whatever terminology the university was using at that time. So there were all of these, you know, classifications, but I personally didn't really feel called to any of them just because I don't identify as, you know, an Asian American or APIA or whatever they were choosing to call us. And I felt really strongly that I'm, you know, a Tibetan person, and that makes me Indigenous. And there was no really space for talking about that in many places that I sort of tried to enter, whether they were, you know, organizing spaces or these academic spaces. There was no place for us as Indigenous people from different diasporas all over the world to really come together and talk about this like very, what felt like a very liminal and lonely experience. And so I wanted to create that space, even if, you know, it was confusing for people or people didn't really know how to, maybe it was the first time they were encountering something like this and didn't know how to interact with it. I knew that it was really needed and there was going to be someone, you know, who would feel called to that. And there were, including um, us both. There was one other person who was Pacifica from the Pacific Island diaspora. And ever since we met after that, you know, we kept meeting up and we would always talk about writing. That's something that we bonded a lot over and that I think made us really close in those early years of knowing one another. Was always talking about writing and writing as a way of transmuting all these different not just, you know, pains and sorrows, but also joys of being who we are, being of our lands and just being part of our respective diasporas. And so it felt really natural when you asked me to be your editor because I knew that your book had been, you know, in the works for so many years. And of course, during the lockdown years, we weren't, you know, in as much contact. But when you came to me a few years after we both had sort of migrated away from Michigan, and you were like, I have this book and it's ready and I need someone to look at it and you would be perfect. I was like, oh, actually, this was perfect timing. Because I think that's what it took. It took for us to meet. It took us meeting in this particular setting and context, and then us having our various reckonings and reconciliations with the ways we were moving in that place and with those lands. Um, for for us to actually get to a point where I could show up as the editor and you could show up with this manuscript. So I think it was just really perfect and really like meant everything happened as it was meant. That's really how I felt.
Thank you for sharing about, you know, your positionality from the organizers for that conference because again, I really appreciate it. I don't think I would have gone if I didn't find that type of space. I was an international student, non-traditional international student there, and and as I grew up in El Salvador, so as a Salvadoran, right? And then I was born in Honduras. So I have this connection with the ecologies of Central America, but also Mesoamerica that I feel that is much more expansive. And, and so it was really beautiful to be able to talk about these um, similarities in our experiences of being diasporic seeds. And so I appreciated that. And I continue to appreciate that decision making, right, that you had as coordinator, and then how we are here now celebrating the birth, the bringing forth of a book that I could coming from oral traditions, it has been challenging, and you know that. Moving from storytelling, right, the actual uh, practice, indigenous practice that elders tell stories to youngsters so that we also learn these stories so that we can pass them on. And you were the first person ever to be in touch with the complexity of pretty much me trying to write, but as if I was talking. And now I am remembering the amount of work, as the editor and proofreader, that you brought so many comments and so you know the the bold and subtle tender ways that you provoke through your inquiries to clarify, right? And also, you not necessarily, you don't know Spanish, and I do drop a lot of Spanish words, or the poetic I write, the way I write in English is very poetic. It's kind of like, in a way, trying to move with the flow of Spanish, and I would say, ancestral tongues that were songs, were like cantadas, like cantos. And so what was it like for you to kind of really do the work of, you know, first, like, to feel the massiveness or whatever it is that you saw in the amount of work, and then what was your strategy? Because yeah, what was your creative strategy to read?
For sure. Well, when I first started proofreading your book, I mean, I had an idea of what to expect, but I never really read. Um, I mean, I don't know Spanish, right? So it was my first time trying to read a manuscript that had Spanish in it. And I felt also like and we had talked so much about just our stories and where we come from, but also a lot of the work that I was doing was learning the contours of a new context, right? Talking about a lot of your manuscript is talking about a very specific place, which I knew very little about. Um, but as I was sort of uncovering more and more of your stories through the book, I just kept encountering so many parallels in our stories, and it became even more clear to me, and I think I had more language to talk about it, which is ironic, I guess, when I actually went to visit you last year when you invited me to come visit your homelands. And there, right, I don't speak much Spanish. And so there was not much communication that I could do in a spoken language, but despite that, the land was communicating in so many ways, right? The hills and the mountains talk, the plants speak, and there was mutual recognition there. We were seeing plants that grow in parts of the world where we're from, where we spend time. And so being in this place that like feels sort of in the human realm so unfamiliar because I can't communicate with anyone, um, actually began to feel so much familiar when I tuned into this different frequency of the land, right? I was like, oh, actually, I know those flowers and I know those plants. I know what they smell like. And I know that there's nectar in that one that you can drink. And there's all these different ways of relating that we pick up on when we're not just tuned into human spoken language, right? Or written language. So actually, I think being the editor for this book made me think a lot more about language. As someone who grew up speaking and writing in English, I was, supporting you through editing a lot of the more semantic parts of the book. And it really made me think about language the entire time, about how we're actually using language to inspire feeling, and also bridge all of these contexts that we belong to so that we can see more clearly the things that actually make us really similar, right? And so there were, all these parts of the book where you're writing in Spanish, where there's, beautiful verses, verses and verses in Spanish, or there's certain phrases that you never translate throughout the book. And yeah, it just really made me think about how language is just one way in which we communicate, right? And that's one of the things that I love about poetry, and I'm sure you too. Um, the ways that poetry really deconstructs and sort of uncovers these tensions and how we're using language, and um, and how much language is really just an approximation, right, of our human experiences, um, for which there really is no real language but the land. And so I definitely couldn't cognitively understand parts of the book, but it reminds me actually, if I can tell like a very brief story of something that happened this past winter. Um, in our neighborhood where I live in Queens, there's a community center, and it's called Centro Corona. And at that community center, there's a community-based filmmaking collective called Un Colectivo Recuerda. And at their community filmmaking showcase this last winter, we screened this really short film that we made. And the entire film is essentially my partner's uncle praying, making offerings and giving libations at his altar, and he's praying in Tibetan. And one of the things that I was wondering as I was editing this film was whether it would translate to people who didn't have much cultural context and who couldn't understand Tibetan. But I talked about it with my partner, and they refused to put subtitles on the film. And they weren't sure if putting subtitles would even contribute to people's understanding at all. So I was like, okay, yeah, let's see what happens. And so we screened the film, and during the Q&A, I still remember this comment that someone made, and the person who made this comment is actually a Spanish and English translator. And something that they said was that they really loved how there was no translations or subtitles on the film. And the film is not long, it's about 5 or 6 minutes, but it's long enough that if it's in a language you don't understand and a context that you're not familiar with, it makes you feel a lot of feelings, right? You feel confused, maybe a little bit anxious, and I think that amount of time is enough for people to really start tuning into different frequencies, right? A different register of communication where we're not just speaking or writing, but something else is being communicated entirely, right? And it's visual, so also that's a different sort of portal that we're inviting people into. And so I love that comment because she was saying that it really made her sit with just a completely different register of communication. And that I think was another small lesson for me in what possibilities open up when we tune into some of these different um, frequencies and just observe in a different way, practice observing um, what's around us in a different way. And so I think that's really what I was leaning on when I was editing your book was, okay, like I might not be able to, in my brain, understand um, what this particular verse says, but how does my body feel when I read this? How does my heart feel? What is this communicating beyond just the words on the page, right? Um, what is the flow of this story? How does it make me feel? So um, it's definitely a more expansive, I guess, creative strategy beyond just like editing the grammar, which is what I was doing at some points, but definitely not applicable to all parts of the book. So I was really leaning on these different um, sort of entry points into what you were writing about, and also learning these lessons in real time in so many other contexts just in my life.
Thank you for this story about this short film that you all did, and how it resonated with people there. And actually, um, one question that you asked when you were editing my Tejiendo, um, was, are you planning to do a glossary with the Spanish words? And my left brain, which is, I mean, the left side of the brain was quickly into, yes, people should know, or like, you know, this kind of reactivity. I was reacting to your question because I was feeling the pressure within myself, not because you asked the question, but I was coming from this very academic side of looking at things, right? Which is a habit. So in breaking that habit of only interacting with my left side of my brain, I allow myself, which is the way, you know, the book has been able to become in this form of a book with cantos, with um, um, I call it like Spanglish is one of its languages, and that's okay. But the way that the first seed of what wanted to emerge came from me was being in profound listening with my heart, with all of my senses, to the land in Michigan. And I moved from all the things that happened within the academic realm, you know, like the theoretical, the psychology, the social work, the all of these, to I was just like feeling within my soul, as you know, we speak here, the waters beneath the waters under the waters, the stories below the stories that wanted to speak, that were speaking to my heart, to my to what I call the self, were coming from my, you know, I decided to listen to the movements within the ecologies I was in relationship with, cultivating a specific type of relationship with. And that is what readers will feel in the stories, in the, you know, the stories that were curated to stay as part of the tapestry of the textual tapestry. And what you're saying, I guess that's, you know, not I guess, I feel that that's exactly why I felt a profound connection with your capacity to move through the complexity of what I was bringing into the pages. And that is beautiful. You know, you and I, we have created a new way of, I don't know what to call it, and maybe we don't need to call it anything else, but like I would say our ancestors showed up in this creative exchange, in this creative weaving, and I'm grateful that we met at a certain, you know, juncture. And so when you hold the book now, you know, I can sense the crafting that comes from not, you know, you as the editor, proofreader, and everybody else that have been part of this, supporting and accompanying this project, is there is something that we're bringing into this that has been dismissed for too long, or has not been acknowledged for too long. And so you speak about that, which is, and that was one of the hard, like the challenges for me. I do want to give this form. Now it has the form of a book. And poetry, obviously, there is lots of poetry, but because I felt this is part of my responsibility as a storyteller. But then the challenge that I felt was, or I encountered, was this sense of human centrism, you know, and the way we speak. I'm like, if the wind would be speaking, what would what would I hear? And I feel, I will be honest, most of the poetry feels that I just became the conduit, the interpreter, the translator, if you will. But it's kind of hard to say, oh, I own it, you know, that kind of weird thing of that we live in a world where art is just becoming a commodity too. So it's yeah. So anyways, I am really grateful that your ancestors and my ancestors did something for us to meet each other in these journeys. Um, and thank you for your freshness. I feel that you bring a freshness into the editing. You are so great on asking inquiries that would expand, would allow me to like wait. There is a lot of comments, but we can go one section at a time. That's okay. No rush. There is not linearity. And sometimes I would start at the beginning and sometimes at the end, but most of the time I feel it was in the middle that I would be like, I feel that in the middle, I can move through spaces and then, yeah. So anyway, is there anything that is coming up as I am sharing that you would like to share?
I just remembered actually one of our first conversations. We were talking about this exact thing. We were talking about how um, hard it is to be a writer that has to write inside of the academy. And you were showing me your anthology, an anthology of, I think, women of color poetry that you appeared in. And we were talking about this exact thing. How do we, as people who come from storytelling and oral traditions, um, translate that to the page, especially because oral traditions do mimic the land in many ways, right? They they know what the wind says when it moves, right? And they mimic it. They know the sounds that animals make, how the sounds that humans make are so similar, and bring us closer to animal relatives. And I remember us talking about this, and now that I remembered that while you were speaking, it just feels like it's coming full circle. That we're back in the same place where we started. And yeah, that of course none of this was linear. Even in the editing process, I would often start at the bottom and go up to the top, or would have to return back to the top when I reached the bottom because something came up that I could have only uncovered if I got to the bottom. So um, what we're doing is we're deconstructing, right? We're deconstructing language, we're deconstructing time and space, and that's also a project of decolonization, right? Um, is um, is dismantling the clock, that our bodies are against our will being committed to, and in that recovering all of the frequencies of possibility of our ancestors. So full circle.
Thank you. Well, we will end with that because I feel that this is the right place. And I do hope that, um, our creative um, collaboration continues to sprout. I hope I can also read read your your stories when the time comes. But thank you so much for having said yes to my invitation and for having brought, for bringing all of who you are into and your relationships to the lands, to your ancestors, to the um, ecologies that you come from and your family come from, into the ways that you supported this project. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And we will be sharing where people can find more about your projects and in the description of this video. So thank you, Priya.